po tom, že zomrel
even though it's very difficult to speak about good evening after all that has happened. And there were also dozens of people who died a death which is not the same as that of Juraj Kušnierik, but also died under very unfair circumstances. Our tonight's program has changed slightly because Pascal Bruckner, who was supposed to be here, has apologized and he stayed in Paris. Before I start the discussion, we'll hear the message sent to us by Pascal. He sent us his message apologizing for his absence here tonight, and he asks our understanding for his absence.
Merci. Je suis Thierry Chavel de Berlin, mais aussi de Paris. J'ai téléphoné ce matin avec Pascal.
This morning I had Pascal Bruckner on the phone. He was supposed to be here on the podium with us. He was understandably in shock. He told me that he just got the first news of the events that unfolded in Paris. Just after the funeral of Andrei Buxman, who died this week, he wrote me a mail, or it was a mail addressed to all people present here. Let me read it. Dear friends, dear participants, I'm sure you understand that I am unable to come to the Bratislava Forum because of the events that sank Paris into grief. Until 4 a.m., police helicopters, vehicles, firemen flooded my neighborhood because I live near the 14th arrondissement where the events took place. Of course, all of us are staying on the phone waiting for the news of our friends. France is being awakened to a deep shock. All of these news that have been reported and these simultaneously organized attacks are a source of a great shock to all of us. But this is not the reason for us to step back, because France and other countries that are in coalition fighting the Islamic State must continue fighting against Islamofascism and terrorism. The struggle, the fight is only starting. It will be long, it will be painful, but we have no right to lose this war. Thank you, Pascal. Thank you, Thierry. And we'll start the discussion just as the interpreters finish their job. Working languages of today's discussion are going to be English, French, and Slovak. If I may, I would like to devote this discussion to my schoolmates who died yesterday in Bataclan Theatre in Paris. I will try not to betray my feelings during our tonight's discussion. The new Enlightenment, which is the title of this panel, sounds or looks almost ironic in this situation. We have Patrick Oshednik here, who is a French-Czech, not only translator, but also an author. He is the author of the book Europeana. Next to him, we have Haris Pashovic from Sarajevo, whom you certainly know very well as a prominent European theatrologist and activist. Sounds almost inappropriate. Anyway, he is a highly renowned person at the European cultural scene. Good evening, Haris. Next to me, we have Leonidas Donskis from Vilnius, who spent part of his journey with Zygmunt Bauman, whom you all know, and who tried to show us certain parallels that we have discussed before we approached our topic and before the events that are currently unfolding in Europe. I'll start with Patrick, because he is at the source, so to say. Patrick, does it have any sense at all to speak about the project of New Enlightenment? Because the moment the words humanism and Enlightenment are said, you are being ridiculed, or they tell you it's not relevant because we should look at today's reality, and the reality is what happened yesterday in Paris. Concerning this notion, this new enlightenment, I do not have any problem with that word, because I believe that enlightenment is a process, a homogeneous process, but the new enlightenment is speaking about questioning enlightenment, what it was and what it means. So the word new is not appropriate, and not only for me. So I am in a slightly paradoxical situation, because I am sitting here at a discussion which I am not sure what is going to be about, and I do not understand the subtitle of New Enlightenment, because it says that the large groups of the population are not in harmony. I do not know what the author of these lines had in mind, speaking about the large groups. Europe is quite clearly an heir of Enlightenment philosophy. This is a fact, and nobody can question it. Modern Europe is something that we owe to the age of lights, the Enlightenment. First of all, it is a philosophical concept, and only then it is a political concept, like the administration of a community, an idea. I believe that Kant spoke about the liberation of human mind as a principle of the period. The principle started with the Renaissance, and it culminated with Enlightenment, and we are heirs to this. So I really do not understand the concept that I am expected to speak about. Well, we do not have to speak about New Enlightenment, but we can speak about Enlightenment if it seems to be more appropriate to you. Patrick, but isn't this a concept that is already lived its life? It's at the end of the life? No, not so. It is not exhausted. This concept is not exhausted, because there are not so many possibilities of how to organize one's life in society, on the basis of what values, on the basis of what criteria. Enlightenment says one thing: get rid of prejudices, of conventions. Of course, nobody can get rid of prejudices and conventions 100%, but at least try to resist stereotypes and conventions as best as you can. So we are warned against the dogmas, and we should think for ourselves, because if you do not think about yourselves, I don't think Enlightenment is quite an opposite to church or religious dogmas, but I think it is a way of how to reach the most harmonious or the least non-harmonious society. Leonidas?
Co mám zrobić?
We'll try this one. Thank you. First and foremost, I would say that the topic of the Enlightenment appears to me as quite relevant. I don't think that it is out of date for many reasons. The Enlightenment, if we try to understand some outcomes and derivative phenomena, so appears as something that deeply permeated the 20th century. We know sometimes it is with political humor, with some elements of political joke, that we describe communism to have been a sort of the heir of the Enlightenment gone astray, a sort of prodigal son, or something that gone astray. But the same applies to an opposing movement, which was a major cultural, philosophical movement of Europe, Romanticism. Romanticism could be described as a child of, I would say that, it had a child, in a way, a very difficult and I would say tragical and even murderous child, Nazism. So Nazism could be described as the outcome of the dark side of Romanticism. And what happened in the 20th century is, in a way, the struggle between the forms of sensibility, of European political and moral sensibility. The Enlightenment deeply permeated Europe. Sometimes I really wonder why, for what reason we poke fun of the Enlightenment, because it deeply permeated our political and moral discourses.
But did it really?
I think it did. If you take...
Excuse me, Leonidas. Did it really, even in Central Europe?
Well, it's a difficult thing, because when we address this issue of Central Europe, to say nothing of Eastern Europe, the problem is that, in Central Europe, even the most sophisticated circles of intellectuals, so they got those major movements from the second, as a sort of, second-hand thing. It just happened that, those great major events, the Baroque, the Enlightenment, Romanticism, they didn't happen in Central Europe per se. So they were accepted, or they were, in a way, they were late. And things were even more complicated in Eastern Europe. We know that Pyotr Chordayev, a great Russian philosopher who left his philosophical letters to Madame Pankova, he complained that Russia didn't have any single major European movement. So things were better with Central Europe, but I think we were affected. We were affected by those movements. But of course, in Western Europe, I believe that they were, in a way, mundane component of European life.
So how come then, how can we talk about something very much universal when you say that there are different ways to derive the traditions from the Enlightenment, but on the other side you say that it's very different in Eastern Europe, it's very different in Central Europe, and it's much more different in Western Europe?
Let's be clear on this. In many ways, as we have a look on the political map of modern Europe, I think that Central and East European nations, they emerged as children of Romanticism. If I have a look at my country, Lithuania, for instance, so Czesław Milosz made a joke that Lithuania emerged due to the activities of a bunch of philologists. It were just some linguistic games, and they derived Lithuanian culture as a project. So, because things were very different in Western Europe at this point, and we are more or less a legitimate child of Romanticism, I have to say. And that's why it makes sense to ask the question this way. But even so, I would say that the Enlightenment was not as monolithical as sometimes we tend to portray it. There were some profound differences between Montesquieu and some other people, for instance.
Like who?
Like who, for instance, there were people who represented more or less the technocratic wing of the Enlightenment. And de tout d'être, for instance, l'élément de l'idéologie. He wrote, he was a typical outcome of Polytechnique, of Paris Polytechnique, yes, where he described everything as a majestic project of reason and everything.
Yeah, but that's why, right?
Exactly right.
And the fixation to the reason.
The problem that many Europeans had with the Enlightenment, especially the counter-Enlightenment, people like Vico in Italy, or Herder, or Hamann in Germany, was that they underrated emotions, they underrated feelings. Not everyone. Montesquieu and Voltaire understood the importance of emotions.
How come? Because on the other side you say that Enlightenment and Romanticism are brothers and sisters. And one is very emotional and the other one is not. How come?
Well, I think that this is, in a way, this is love-hate relationship. Romanticism derived many things from the Enlightenment. Absolutely. Even the concept of Europe, even the concept of more or less coherent European legacy, it is an Enlightenment concept. And Romantics took it over. But of course, there were many important differences. The Romantics uncovered, some sort of mystical, mysterious side of human life. They started even overrating emotions, mysteries, secrets of human life. Whereas the Enlightenment was a little bit lacking in subtlety when they addressed reason, civilization in the singular. So that was barbarity vis-a-vis civilization. Of course, that was something that Romantics couldn't buy as a story, and there were some profound differences, but they formed intellectual sensibilities. Both movements spoke about human misery, about human pain. Voltaire, in Candide or Ingenue, spoke and wrote about human pain, about human suffering. And we know it quite well from the debates between Pangloss and Martin the Manichaean, for instance. So it's about human pain. Well, pain is a part of Romanticism and Romantic sensitivity.
But it's not necessarily inherent to Enlightenment, right? And I will ask Haris, because you have experienced in Bosnia the total failure of Enlightenment, humanity, and whatever. So maybe it's much more attractive to people in Western Balkans to talk about the idea of Enlightenment as something we should realize in our lives, in our societies. Is it true or not?
Well, let me come to the answer to your question. I'm, as we are all, very much under the impression of the terrorist attack on Paris last night, and I'm checking my friends as you do, and as you are all day long, and there is a very, very strong message, united message, coming from many Parisians, and that's the message of resistance. They say we are resilient. They say we are strong. And there was a man playing Imagine by John Lennon. He brought a piano, you saw that probably on the street, and played Imagine. There are many other expressions of determinations of the Parisians to remain what they are, to not to let terrorism and evil, overwhelm their city. I was in Paris in January this year during the terrorist attack on Charlie Hebdo, journalists and artists, and I was at Place de la République with the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Parisians united. There were many among them French Arabs and people who live in France and are not originally maybe born in France, or maybe born in France but Arabs or blacks, and I think that's to be a French today, to be Parisian today. Je suis Parisien. It is a new Enlightenment, and I think it's very important to understand that we are talking in a very serious moment. There was a military operation against Paris, against French, against secularism, and against Europe last night in Paris. It's not only against France, and it's not only terrorism.
Sorry, do you think it's is the expression of fear or resistance, the unity, togetherness? When the people stand together, is it enough to say something, or they have to do something more?
No, obviously it's not enough, but it's a precondition to treasure the values of the humanistic society. That's what we did in Sarajevo. Now I'm coming back to your question. For 4 years, when we were exposed, civilians, to the same type of terror, it was on the daily basis for 4 years in the live television broadcast around Europe and around the world. And what was a spontaneous a reaction of survival of the society is to keep multiculturalism, not to take revenge against the people of the Serb origin or Serbs who lived in Sarajevo with us, despite the fact that there were Serbian forces targeting civilians on the daily basis, not to destroy Orthodox Christian churches in the city, and produce international and cosmopolitan culture and spirit, despite the fact that every day tens of people were killed. 11,500 people were killed during 4 days of the siege. So I think what I can see in Paris today is this kind of spirit. They will not give away, to these attacks, and I think that we should follow Parisian spirit at this moment everywhere in Europe, because let me just tell this. This is what's happening, cannot be understood and should not be understood. It is evil. And during the siege of Sarajevo, I tried, as many people, we tried to understand why they are doing this to us. And there was no answer. The answer was, this cannot be understood, but it can be confronted. In 1997, I invited Claude Lanzmann, a French philosopher and a member of French resistance during the Second World War, who made the most important movie about Holocaust, Shoah. In the dialogue with him, I heard exactly the same sentence. He said, that could not be understood, but that could be confronted. Primo Levi, if you remember, writes when he asked a German guard in Auschwitz, why? Warum? The German guard answered, here is kein warum. Here there is no why. And I think that at this point, it's very important to focus on confronting the evil instead of trying to explain, because I think it's a waste of time.
So you see the parallels between the situation in Sarajevo and situation in Paris?
It's a terror against civilians. It's a crime against humanity.
Okay.
What happened last night in Paris, it's a crime against humanity. So that's that category.
Patrick, tu m'entends là? Ouais. Est-ce que, quand tu as évoqué l'idée que le Lumière nous ont rendu modernes, en quelque sorte, en Europe, est-ce que ça ne veut pas dire en même temps...
My question is, are we in Europe less resistant against such situation because Enlightenment is a bit softer, a bit weaker today? Maybe it is not resilient, and whether it's weaker, I would say it's more fragile. I think it's more fragile. If we speak about this concept based on tolerance, freedom, and so on, and on respect for the other, then it is more fragile than unity. Yes, it's more fragile, but if we make a parallel with democracy, it's just the same. We speak about a regime which allows its citizens things the other regimes are not making possible. It means that it is against them. And Enlightenment in France is La Lumière, it's in plural, and for me it is very important. This plural is very important because it lights and it signals that there is not only one truth. Be it
sa týka nejakého konkrétneho náboženstva,
a religion, or there is no truth in singular.
a ja považujem
And I think that the contribution of the epoch is plural, but I must also say that I don't fully agree with what has been said just a while ago.
tá opozícia medzi
That is this opposition between Enlightenment and Romanticism. We had also pre-Romanticism, and if we should demarcate this line, then the line is between Germany and France. A German Romanticism is an answer to the French culture. It's a response to French culture.
bolo explicitne
So
písané v textoch romantikoch, v nemeckých romantikoch, to sa nachádza
what you find in German Romantic literature is in the French Enlightenment literature. So it's a reaction to cultural dominance. Does it mean that the fact
že začlenenie
that Enlightenment is a part of our liberal democracies makes us too open to religious fanaticism and barbarianism? Well, yes,
takýto dôvod
such a reason,
transcendentný, že
a transcendental reason,
môže mať, nemusí to byť vždy religiózne,
it doesn't have to be always a religious one, and then
náboženstva.
it's a shock for the religions and the observant people.
Transcendance pourrait être de l'homme, c'est pas seulement l'apanage des sphères religieuses.
That come to my mind. Well, first and foremost, I think I totally agree with Patrick concerning the fact that in many ways what happened in Germany, especially in the case of Herder, that was the response to the Enlightenment, and Romanticism was the response. But at the same time, we don't have to confine the Enlightenment only to France. With all due respect, and especially tonight, when I'm tempted to say that nous sommes tous les Parisiens maintenant. Of course, but we have to remember Immanuel Kant and some other voices of the Enlightenment. They were German voices. And when we talk about the importance of the Enlightenment, well, in Kant's political treatises, that was for the first time in the history of intellectual history of Europe, that we have the idea of Europe as such, the united Europe. So this is an idea of universal history from a cosmopolitan point of view. In this essay, he talks about Fedus Amfictionum, the great international federation of Europe. And then on perpetual peace, another his treatise when he talks about Fedus Pacificum, the peaceful federation of Europe. So not only French, but German, Scottish voices, Adam Ferguson, Adam Smith, so they were very important. So the Enlightenment was about European modernity, whereas France gave to the world, I would say, well, many things, the social sciences, social and political theory, forms of sensitivity, struggle against fanaticism and bigotry in France. But look, with the Scottish Enlightenment, we have economic theory. We have first important theories of religion, David Hume, for instance. Well, this is to say that the Enlightenment had many forms, and it would be very unjust to reduce the Enlightenment to a sort of, movement which opposed barbarity and fanaticism alone. It was about compassion. When Voltaire defended Jean Calas, it was about compassion. It was against fanaticism, but at the same time, it was the idea of écraser l'enfant, to crush the infamous ones. It was about justice. It was about human rights. Now we cherish the concept of human rights, without which Europe would be unthinkable. But human rights represent the Enlightenment concept.
But do we cherish it really?
Well, we cherish when we are at the risk of losing them. It's like with human health. You don't prize it when you have it, when you are young and physically very fit. But when it happens that you are not getting younger, so you start cherishing your health, and the same applies to human rights. If they do not pose a problem, if countries are doing well in terms of liberal democracy, so then it's okay, we understand that there is no mortal risk to be German or British nowadays and to defend human rights. But things are very, very different if you defend human rights in North Africa, for instance, or in the Middle East. So meaning that we cherish human rights only when they are in peril, only when they are at great risk. But I would say that we would be unthinkable nowadays without the Enlightenment. Their ideas of superstition, reason, human nature. And I can tell you there is a paradox of the Enlightenment. Sometimes we poke fun of the Enlightenment saying that, well, it was about civilization emanating from France, vis-a-vis barbarité, somewhere in the East like Russia, when Diderot tried to educate, Catherine the Great or something, or Rousseau was trying to draft the constitution for Poland without ever visiting the country. But at the same time, I have to tell you, the Enlightenment was about human sensitivity. It was, among other things, about the universalism of human nature. And we have a paradox. When we hear the voices nowadays that, look, but we cannot expect the respect for human rights, for instance, in Iran, to the same degree and using the same standard as in Sweden or the Netherlands, and others reply, but human beings are born free, equal. In terms of human dignity, there is the universalism of who is right and who is wrong here. And I think that once we throw out the Enlightenment, if we simply reject the Enlightenment, throwing it out the door, it may come back through the window. It just comes back through the window because we defend the universalism of human rights, which is the Enlightenment concept. If we were perfectly, sensitive romantics, we should have said that, look, but people are very different and there are some mysterious units, collective souls and collective individuals, but we don't apply this concept because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights would be dead with this kind of philosophy.
Leonidas, do you think it's granted forever that once we have won this battle for enlightenment everywhere, all around the continent, so it's granted forever and we don't have to keep on the making better legislation, give more freedoms to people, or is there a risk that one day in what has happened in Paris or before in London or in Madrid,
One day there is a genocide like
yes,
we
we will lose it and we will even not notice it.
have lost it.
Absolutely, we lost it a couple of times, and well, I have to say that there were some sober voices and very reasonable voices that warned us that what happened to the former Yugoslavia, to the countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina, so in a way that was a premonition and anticipation of a huge European crisis. That was
specifically to the Muslim community, that was the subject of genocide.
Absolutely.
As the European indigenous people.
We thought for a long time that, that war is impossible in Europe. So it happened in the very center of Europe, in the very heart of Europe. So we thought that any genocide would be unthinkable after the Holocaust. It happened again. Just look at Srebrenica. And that's why I would say that, well, it's very important to keep doing this. Because if we try to console ourselves, we then are at great risk of deceiving ourselves. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. And that's why I would say that on the one side, you are right, because there is something very fragile and vulnerable here. And this vulnerability comes from the fact that we thought for some time, with very good reason, that Central Europe is about anxiety, fragility, unsafety, insecurity, and the West is about institutions that are very solid, very strong, very powerful, with established practices. And look, the West is becoming one big, single, Central Europe. It's not safe anymore. It's not secure anymore. And, well, welcome to the 21st century. France is as insecure and unsafe now as the Czech Republic or Slovakia were for decades, or the Baltic states were for decades.
Yes, but we know that since we are reading Michel Houellebecq, because he's a very great Central European writer, and much more comprehensive to Central Europeans than to Western Europeans people. But the other question is for you, Haris, that the thing is, I know it's very strange to say, but since a few centuries in Europe, when you were not born in Europe as a European, you had to pass through the Holocaust or through the deportations to earn the right to be European. How come that in Bosnia the Muslim communities were not accepted or understood as the entity which was destroyed and then which became a real European entity? Well, I try to understand the mechanism of the historical reason of what was going on in Bosnia, and how come that the idea of integration of what has happened with Muslim communities didn't pass to the collective experience of all Europeans, to the Muslims.
I mean, the Holocaust was against European citizens, because most of the Jews, or all of the Jews, subject to Holocaust, were born in Europe. As you know, Bosnian Muslims were born in Bosnia on the European soil.
Sorry, I don't want to be like misunderstood, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, but I just wanted us not to be understood together. So just to emphasize that we know what happened. But we can start maybe from the question why Turkey has not been admitted as a member of European Union for so long, and eventually the most radical, let's say the most right, I mean in the sense of political right, fraction in Europe led by Erdogan was elected and welcomed by the Western countries. So and I mean, everybody in Turkey will say because we are Muslims. I mean that's not a secret. And everybody in Bosnia would say, we are not admitted and we are not saved during the war because we were Muslims. So I mean that's something that's clear. There is no great love for Muslims in Europe. But or maybe we can say that's the history. But what is now? I'm more interested in what is now. Before I came here, just a minute ago, a young, very smart and very energetic woman here, Ivana, told me, I will listen to you. She's a nice, young, fashionable and curious, and she's sitting there now on the floor. And there are lots of young people here, and I wouldn't like us to look the old ladies who were once very beautiful women and now who browse through the photo albums and saying how beautiful we were, how rebellious we were, how wonderful we did it, how courageous we were. I think that we have to connect with the younger generations that ask the question about their realities, and their realities are the questions about who are the anonymous and how do they act. Is it right what Edward Snowden did, or is it not? Is it right that Julian Assange has been for 3 years imprisoned in Ecuadorial embassy in London? Is it good what WikiLeaks does? Is it a new enlightenment? I actually liked the title very much.
And is it really, Harris? Yeah. Is it? Do you think so?
I'm asking the questions. I think we are not in positions to give the full answers. I think that my sympathies are with Snowden and Anonymous and Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, but I don't know enough. I'm not fluent in this language. And I think I'm trying to learn about it. I try to understand. We're talking about Europe. Is there a Europe, except in the political sense of the borders and the passports and the Brussels, but in the virtual space, there is one world. There is no particularly European virtual space. You know, I mean, people communicate from everybody, from Australia to the United States, and there are attacks going on against the corporations and their computers, and so I think that we have to check, is there connection between the ideas of Enlightenment or any other ideas in the past to what's happening today, and how does it translate? Bill Joy, a scientist from the United States who established Sun Microsystems, which is equivalent to Microsoft, but in hardware, he wrote an article in 2001 called "Why Future Doesn't Need Us." And it was the article that warned about the developments in science that will affect and does affect, do affect at this moment everything what we do. And he established the category democratization of evil. He said that never before we had a situation in which somebody sitting in a small village in Central Asia can be a serious threat to people in Europe or the United States via different type of electronic terrorist attacks, or producing a weapon for mass destruction. And I think that we are now facing this democratization of evil, that we have to see what is the best answer to that. Does it mean, we just discussed before in the meeting that, it was horrible in a sense of human rights, what happened in the United States in terms of tightening security, applying all these completely forbidden measures, to get some information, but the result is that the terrorism in the United States has been decreased almost to zero.
Does it mean that we need less legacy of enlightenment to be more, let's say stronger to fight the new threats? Can we face it with this idea of humanism, of post-Second World War humanism, saying that what we are coming to tell you is human rights, evangel, and all this stuff, and we don't want to kill you, we don't want to steal you, but they will answer cutting your head off. So what can you do with that?
Well, I would say that we shouldn't be naive, and we have to understand that, well, democracy needs to be protected. So the same applies to the whole package of, our civil liberties and human rights. We have to protect our great advantages, and Europe has to be protected. So Europe is much more vulnerable that it appears from the first sight. So it's quite vulnerable. So, and that's why we have to defend it. We cannot take it for granted anymore. I'm afraid to say that when we talk about this great paradox of modernity, so everything is quite close to what comes as its antidote, or its, or its polarity, so to say. For instance, in terms of political existence, I'm afraid to say that Europe will get closer and closer to the form of existence so widespread in Israel. It will be something similar to Israel. Very tight security, almost paranoid institutions, mass surveillance, checking in the airport system, that are just kid stuff to compare, to what happened until now. We will have something for real. And I'm quite convinced that if the West has become a great global single central Europe in terms of unsafety and insecurity, so I think that Europe in terms of mass surveillance and counter-terrorism measures will get closer and closer to Israel. And I believe that at the same time, what is crucial is to defend the humanistic legacy of Europe, not to become paranoid, not to become ridden by fear, not to become absolutely deaf and blind to human liberties. And when we talk about refugees, so again, I was struck that in my country there was so little sensitivity to the refugees, and people were absolutely paranoid, thinking that this is a threat. This is just a threat. But how can we deal with this issue, simply thinking that, this is just about barbarity, that they're just some barbarians, knocking on the door. So it's very difficult, and I think that one of the largest challenge, one of the major challenges of the 21st century will be to protect democracy, to protect Europe, combining it with our sensitivity and our dedication to human rights and civil liberties. It will be quite difficult. Because I can tell you, well, what is happening nowadays is quite simple. Every single tragedy that happened last night in Paris, it works for the benefit of far right in Europe. Let's be honest on this. It works for the benefit, and these guys will tell, it's like in Lithuanian folk song. Didn't I tell you, my little sister, that there is a danger to your life? Well, I just imagine that for Madame Le Pen, for Le Front National, for the Liberty Party of Mr. Geert Wilders in Holland, it's just the same. It's a triumph. It's the high point of their life, because they are going to win the next phase of their domestic political games or even the elections thanks to this. As simple as that. They are fishing in the same waters. When it comes to the public opinion, every time when the public opinion is shocked and shaken by these events, who benefits? Don't ask. The far-right people, they benefit. And this makes life of human rights defenders or liberals even more miserable, even more difficult. But what is important is fidelity. It's dedication to keep doing the same.
Est-ce que, Patrick, est-ce qu'on n'oublie pas trop souvent peut-être les ennemis de lumière et de liberté qui ne sont pas extérieurs à notre civilisation?
As regards enlightenment and freedom, this is not...
Qui détestent les étrangers. Est-ce qu'on ne devrait pas...
who are our neighbors.
Nemali hovoriť aj o otvorenom nepriateľstve, demokracii a slobode? Nie som si istý, že som pochopil túto otázku, respektíve začiatok tej otázky. Či by sme nemali hovoriť trochu častejšie o nepriateľoch z toho pohľadu národného a demokracie v Európe? Áno, je tu populizmus. Leonidas.
Európa
si sype popel na hlavu už
zhruba 40 let, začalo to v 70. letech v západní Evropě.
For about 40 years, this began in the 1970s in Europe. Europe is always questioning itself, and there is a reason, we cannot doubt about it, but I believe that this is also a form of abdication of the Western European politicians and philosophers, because these post-Enlightenment Europe ideas have disappeared. So let's come back to our topic of Enlightenment. Of course, Nazism is an indirect fruit of rationalism of Enlightenment, like eugenics or racism of the 19th century. Science is a combination of rationalist Enlightenment with German Romanticism. But these are the proofs that are kind of bastards. As regards the right movements and fascist-leaning forces, these have always existed in the public space. The moment society feels that it lives in a certain space which is shared by all those who live in this space, that is, fellow citizens, in this situation, this type of policy disappears from public space. Western Europe has lived through relatively long periods where no fascist ideas were never a reality. But today the situation is different, and we can ask to what extent is Europe, Western society, responsible for this? To what extent is the Muslim society or Muslim components of the population to be blamed? The European left, which is quite clearly the heir to the European anti-clericalism, has succumbed to this concept of Islamophobia. It is a relatively recent concept because
Ten pojem vynořil na novo.
The word was used to for women who refuse to wear a veil. But now we have a different development, and the model is that the Muslim minorities in Europe are those socially weak groups in our societies, and the left intellectuals have joined these two aspects. And so what was more weighty was a socially disadvantaged group. So we must understand that they use the religion more and more. They turn to religion more and more. And we have no right to criticize it because they are those who are socially weak. And we hear this wake up the subjugated of the world. It's not what we hear from Moscow now, but from Mecca now. And the Westerners were so much stupid and not seeing forward that they took this Islamophobia and to think negative of Islamophobism and Islamism. So you are, if you have a negative attitude, you are immediately Islamist. So we had in Europe this with anti-communism. So if anyone criticized communism was anti-communist, and Islamophobia has the same role, discredit the person and to make the and to get the argument from an intellectual level into a criminal field, criminal law field, because Islamophobia is racism and racism is a crime, and so on and so on. So I don't know whether I have answered your question, but I think that the issue is that in contrast to fascism, Nazism, communism, which were mentioned, which were stages in development, and also fruits of Enlightenment, the situation today is different. The situation today we haven't invented here in Europe. It is not based on the values of Enlightenment, which were then maybe applied in a negative way. It is based on other traditions, so it is difficult to, for me, as a European intellectual, it is difficult to feel any guilt for the situation today. I would feel it if models which were mentioned here, these totalitarian models which are mentioned here, where I could feel co-responsibility, because they are based on the same sources as me in my humanistic attitude. And
yes, I agree. I think that the emphasis was placed in a very correct and precise fashion by Patrick, and I think that in fact these problems were not invented in Europe and by Europe, and I agree with this, and there are many, many disturbing complexities, and the devil lurks in the details, so to say. But what is behind these problems is about failed states, and especially when we don't engage with this, and I think that if it is possible to find some sort of, not guilt, of course, but some sort of failure, so that would be lack of lack of coherent foreign policy in the EU. And I deeply regret that this happened, because the EU is an economic union, and in terms of coherent politics, sometimes we have a series of failures. For instance, in the Middle East, if you don't do anything, if you create a vacuum, if it is the void, this void could be filled with hatred and criminal groups. And I think that in many ways this happened. But I would like to mention one more aspect of the Enlightenment, which is a lesson which still stands and still has its importance for us. It is intellectual courage. They were advocating, les philosophes, they were advocating intellectual courage, which is very important for our lives now. And I think that we live in the time of fear. And fear is a very precious political commodity. It is a political commodity which is very widely used by demagogues, by populists. And in many ways, populism is nothing but just an art of translation of private fears into public policies. And that's why they are so successful in many ways. And even there is a phenomenon which I described in my essays as the industry of fear. It is the industry of fear. I was quite struck, and that was an incredible experience. If you allow me to divert your attention from the Enlightenment for half a minute, I would tell you that what happened to the Baltic states was that after the invasion of Russia to Ukraine, when Crimea was occupied and annexed by Russia, so of course it was a very turbulent and difficult time for the Baltic states, because Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia felt that they could be the next target. And of course NATO did its utmost by sending, some military presence, and everything, and sending the messages that if they invade you, so they invade us. They invade NATO, and Article number 5 would be applied. But nothing helped, because for 3, 4 or 5 months, Lithuania lived in panic. So the country panicked, and I felt it very, very strongly. And I tried to counterbalance, to challenge it by writing my essays. But still, what was very important, that our tabloids and online publications started benefiting from this. You get up early in the morning, and 5 or 6 a.m., you just get your iPhone, and you go online seeing whether or not the war broke out in the Baltics. Because they created this type of hysteria. And fear has become a profitable commodity for them. And they started playing this game with fear. And people were scared to death. I had a series of meetings with high school students, or with my students at the university. They kept asking whether or not we will be invaded by Russia, whether or not, and I tried, to mobilize the best of my, rational substance, so to say, by saying that no, I don't think so, because Russia would risk a catastrophic war with America, and even with the nuclear implications. But what I can clearly see, that we live in the time of the industry of fear. It is quite profitable for the media. It is quite profitable, whether it is about refugees or immigrants but it is quite profitable, they benefit a lot, and that's why it's a kind of schizophrenia. On the one side, they fear themselves. They live in fear. On the other side, they make the rest of society to live in fear. And they create this kind of atmosphere which we have to confront. And now I'm going to the point. And the point is, ladies and gentlemen, that Immanuel Kant came out with his motto, sapere audi, dare being wise. Dare being wise and dare to think. Sapere audi, of course, that was in many ways the return to the ideal of the Renaissance, la mente audace, the brave mind, which Italians knew. But what is important, that the Enlightenment left us a very important lesson, that intellectual courage is extremely important in the times of social unrest or some time of crisis. Because if the intellectual classes or artists or writers, if they panic and succumb to this kind of mass hysteria, we're finished. We're just finished. Because believe me, I saw with my eyes how this mechanism works.
And now, what is your feeling about the present situation in Europe? Are we close to panic, even in the, let's say, academic, intellectual and artistic circles, or the people are still resisting?
Well, there are all kinds of intellectuals and all kinds of people, and happily so we are not overwhelmed with one single tendency. Zygmunt Bauman, a beloved friend of mine, so he made a joke saying that if you happen to be an intellectual nowadays, and if you want to be a star in your society, you have to invent yourself either as a celebrity or as a victim. So either go to the TV or radio and become celebrity with some wonderful stories for, mass audiences, or establish yourself as a victim. Just come up with a story how you were abused, by your circles or your family. But I think there is one more thing, that intellectuals sometimes, they become fear mongers. Scare, fear, and panic mongers. And panic mongering, scaremongering, fear-mongering is no joke nowadays. I'm just afraid that some intellectuals and journalists have a sin. They sinned against their societies doing this. But at the same time, we have many people who are sober-minded and courageous enough not to do it. I think one of the best principles of journalism and intellectual work and academic work is not to intimidate people, not to scare people, because you may paralyze your society. You're simply working against your society. Encourage people. Be brave yourself, encourage. Try to overcome fear in yourself by allowing people to overcome this public fear. This is very important. But my feeling is that when it is very difficult, sometimes people are capable of doing the impossible. Like in France last night when people started singing Marseillaise. I think it was very courageous and very important. It's an allusion to the Second World War, of course. But at the same time, that's the French spirit. That's the Allais spirit. And I think that it's very important that they didn't start shouting that death to Islam or death to the Muslims. There was nothing of the kind. I think that would be the worst kind of nightmare. The best thing to do is just to encourage people to live their lives with dignity.
Harris, you wanted to tell something, I think.
I've been thinking by listening to everything what you said, about this selective use of enlightenment for the political or other purposes. So there is kind of enlightenment of convenience in the politics, especially. Christina Lagarde, the director of IMF, International Monetary Fund, she went to Saudi Arabia to express her sorrow for the death of King Abdullah, and then she said publicly that he did some reforms for the women in Saudi Arabia. I don't know if she specifically referred to his 15 wives or to some other reforms unknown to us, but specifically known to her personally. But it was such a shocking statement by a prominent world official. And it went quite quietly around the world. There was no lot of comments on such a statement. On the other side, the foreign minister of Sweden, a brave woman, she said in Saudi Arabia, she protested against, the treatment of women and the position of women in Saudi Arabia, and the result was that the very big arms deal between Sweden and Saudi Arabia was cancelled. So there was lots of apologies flying from Sweden to Saudi Arabia for the misbehavior of the foreign minister, and apparently this contract was reestablished. So I think that there is a lot of hypocrisy in the political field when it comes to the Middle East, and especially to Saudi Arabia, because you can hear criticism of everybody except of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is the most conservative dictatorship in the Middle East. And of course the reason is oil and all the arms and other huge, massive economic deals with Saudi Arabia. That's what I'm afraid of, that if we, in the intellectual and artistic and the cultural field, if we focus too much only on the humanistic values and, these all noble issues, we are missing political aspects, we are missing corporative aspects, we are missing a new age which is happening, and that's what I think that we should be very careful of and introduce these subjects in the intellectual discourse. There is a big taboo I mean, it's not officially taboo, but it is actually taboo in Europe, and that's atheism. And talking about enlightenment, we have to talk about the atheism and also reestablish the role and the subject of atheism in the intellectual discourse. Because we talk about tolerance, but about tolerance among the religions. So yes, you believe in God, you believe in Buddha, I believe in Allah, and you believe in I don't know what. And, you know, we all understand each other, and somehow we all have to reconcile, although we are not compatible by definition. So that's our new Enlightenment idea, I mean, currently in Europe and in the world. But there is unity, and it's very easy to unite all these religions when you say atheism. Then they are in concert. And then they say, yeah, of course, we understand each other, sometimes we quarrel, sometimes we kill each other en masse, but still it's in the family, because if you say atheism, you are our real enemy. And I think in the 21st century, you know, not to discuss atheism as the most plausible platform for the secular society, I think it's a great mistake, because we are ridiculous to ignore 100 years of atomic physics or everything what happened in the last several centuries, starting with the Enlightenment, which was actually Enlightenment because of science, and everything else was just a consequence of the new scientific progressive thinking. So I think that on one side we are becoming technological society, and on the other side we are trying to reconcile that with the alleged fact that we are created from earth. Not you are created from my rib. So we have to be clear, not everybody here is created from earth, but you know, all females are created from our ribs. As we all know, as it's self-evident, and as it's something which we don't have to discuss at all. Of course, we can live 900 years as everybody in the Bible and Quran lived, you know, so our ancestors. Of course, if we bring our son to slaughter him, we will not be charged on the court for the crime, which is, I mean, criminal act in some way of thinking, but we will repeat the ancient woe to the God, which is again self-evident. So I think, you know, talking about enlightenment, we have to open this subject either.
Leonidas, so do you think we have to put back the idea of atheism as a part of the legacy of enlightenment to the discussion? Maybe even for the reason that the most violent acts now in Europe are obviously motivated by the religious thinking.
Absolutely. So I think it's very important because, well, we have to face reality. We have to come to terms with reality, and the reality is that it's one of the superstitions of the Enlightenment. Incredible and paradoxical as it sounds, but even in the Enlightenment there were some superstitions. They try to fight the superstition, and one of their superstitions is the idea that you can negotiate everything, because if you educate people, if they are educated and intelligent enough, they would arrive at the conclusion that you have no, this is not going to happen. There are some problems and some issues that are not negotiable, and there are some problems that are insoluble in principle. I cannot negotiate an anti-Semite, I cannot negotiate a racist, I cannot negotiate a misogynist who simply had contempt for women. So it's impossible. We speak different languages, and those languages cannot be breached anyway. And we have to understand one simple fact, that democratic life is a form of life condemned to contain an element of dissonance. We live with dissonances. We have to live with our differences and dissonances. Some of them are very difficult to bear. Michel Houellebecq, whom we quoted this night, wrote about a very curious thing. I think it must have been in Élément élémentaire or particulier, that he wrote about two kinds of anthropology. One of them being very Christian and very traditional, believe that procreation is the most important thing, human life, and a woman is to give birth. And of course, no reproductive health exists for this paradigm because women are just tailor-made to give birth. And there is another paradigm that a woman is just like a man and in absolutely autonomous, dignified human being, and they are equal. And this anthropology insists on the freedom of women to decide what to do with her body. It's not up to us, to men, to decide what a woman has to do with her body. And these two anthropologies, according to Welbeck, they will never meet. They shall, like in Kipling, the East is the East, the West is the West, and the two shall never meet. These anthropologies shall never meet. And it's just the same as with very conservative people or with very, very far left people. It's impossible to come to terms with some things. But as long as there is no terror, as long as there is no violence in their politics, you can accept life with dissonance. But at the same time, I would argue that atheism, well, it's part of European legacy. And that's why it's very important to preserve it. It would be very naive to think that only religions, with all due respect, but I believe that Europe is about Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, but at the same time, Europe is very much about secular humanism, about atheism, which is a perfectly legitimate part of European identity. And it would be quite naive to dismiss it. So I agree, absolutely.
A teraz je aj priestor vlastne pre otázky. Budeme mať asi...
We have some time left for questions, some 20 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Shadi Shanach, and I'm a member of the Czech Green Party, and I have two very brief comments. I apologize, I don't have a question. But the first comment to Mr. Pashovic, I think that you, at the beginning of the debate, sided very heavily with romanticism when you said that we should not try to understand the terrorists in Paris, but we should confront them because they are evil. And then later you seem to be on the side of rationalism. So I would just appeal, I think personally that of course we have to confront terrorism, but we need to complement it with understanding, because this even religious language labeling somebody as evil, we already had the Bush Junior administration axis of evil, and I don't have to elaborate where does this lead. And the second comment, very brief, is to Mr. Oudředník. Although, of course, some people misuse the concept Islamophobia to push out people from debate, that doesn't mean that Islamophobia does not exist. It's the same with anti-Semitism. There are people who would push out other people from legitimate debate when there is a criticism of Israeli policies, but it doesn't mean that anti-Semitism doesn't exist. So that's the two comments.
Do you want to tell us something, or? Okay, Harris, please.
So, thank you for your comment. I don't think that evil is a religious category. Evil is metaphysical category, but not necessarily religious. It is also religious, but I don't need religion to understand that there is evil, because when you know that there is somebody targeting a 5-year-old girl through the sniper and kills her, that's evil. That's, I don't need the explanation, by anybody whether it's evil or not. So the world of rational behavior doesn't mean for me a lack of passion or or energy, or which you recognized as romantic, but maybe it's more utopian than romantic, and utopia is important. I think that the world, in the words of Emil Cioran, would petrify if there would not be utopia. So I don't think that utopian dreams and rationalism are contradictory.
Thank you. Some more comments maybe, or we go on with more questions?
Well, I would only add that, in fact, well, it's a difficult question. I would try only to add something to your very interesting note. Well, Zygmunt Bauman has developed the concept of adiaphora or adiphorization, which means in a way, the elimination of the ethical dimension in human relations. So it may happen in bureaucracy, and Max Weber thought this way, that a bureaucrat is someone who applies his expertise and knowledge, but simply subtracts any kind of compassion or any intimate relationship with anyone. So meaning that, you're just a rational human being with no ethical standpoint. But I would say that there is another phenomenon. I wouldn't say that I don't buy, precisely the Manichaean divide. I'm not a Manichaeist myself, although I love some writers who were very Manichaean, like Bulgakov, Mikhail Bulgakov, for instance, or Simone Weil, or Czeslaw Milosz, who confessed to have been Manichaeans in the 20th century. They believed that, that evil was a parallel reality, that there was something like that. But I believe that it was very tempting after the Second World War or after the Holocaust. It was very tempting. Like after Bosnia, what happened, it's very tempting to state that evil exists objectively. But I would say that there is another thing, that human beings can withdraw from their sensitivities and then to return. This happens sometimes. I observed this in my life, and I studied it as a scholar, and I have to tell you that the human nature, of which the Enlightenment spoke so eloquently, is a very difficult thing. How can we understand public executions in Europe for centuries, when there were, decapitations, torturing on the wheel, hanging of people, each of them almost indescribable, very, very, very awful, and still in the crowd, not every person was sadistic, or pathological. No. Some young, beautiful ladies with their newborn babies, very good family people, they just enjoyed the show because they believed that the one who is executed is not a man or a woman. They are just a thing. A thing. This is exactly what Simone Weil told in the 20th century. We are capable of transforming the person into a thing. But you wouldn't apply this to your family or to your friends. You get back to your senses. You could be a loving brother or sister or mother. This is exactly what happened to Eichmann. When you know that the best psychiatrists in Israel were commissioned to conclude whether or not the man was pathological. And the conclusion was, no, he's sane. He's perfectly sane. He would be a perfect neighbor, a good father, a good person. There is nothing pathological about him. So, and this is a very important lesson about evil, meaning that evil sometimes can be simply allowed or encouraged.
Nech sa páči. Už aj vám ide mikrofón.
Cousin Price from Open Democracy. Thank you. That was a fascinating conversation. I was very interested in the in your comments about Bill Joy and the concept of the democratization of evil, and I wonder whether one might say that, in a sense, the question of the Enlightenment was how can we build a world without the authority of the church, and perhaps the question of social democracy was how can we build a world without the constraints and the authority of inherited wealth. And the Bill Joyce point suggests a different question for the next stage, which is how can we build a world without the constraints of technological means? So if the technological means of destruction really are at everyone's fingertips, then what is the world that we have to build with that constraint in mind? And that constraint seems to me is a different constraint from the one of without a church or from the one of without inherited wealth. And Leonidas, you had once one vision of what that world was, which is the hyper-securitized world of Israel. But it seems to me that if we really take the Bill Joy thought experiment seriously, take it to its extreme, we think, okay, actually, Israel is still dependent, that hyper-securitized world is still dependent on limited technological means of those who oppose the world you're building. So what else do you need to build into that world? And doesn't it have to be a little bit more inclusive than your world of security? Doesn't it have to be a world of compassion and love?
Some comments, gentlemen?
Thank you for your very, very thoughtful comment. And I will start from your conclusion. Yeah, I mean, I'm an artist, and I do believe that what sounds unorthodox and even unbelievable as the solution, that it's probably the source of the solution. So you don't have, again, to be religious in order to profess love. Love is something that we all understand. And then we can share, and we can forget whether we are religious or not while sharing love. And that's, what we try to do, or at least some of us, I certainly, in my art. I believe that culture, not multiculture, but culture, because culture is by definition, in the words of Susan Sontag, multicultural. So culture is one of the big solutions that relies on enlightenment, but at the same time it can satisfy even those who don't subscribe completely to enlightenment, but can participate in the cultural discourse or cultural feeling, that we build together in this diversity that you were talking about. This concert that is harmonious, that you mentioned. But on the other side, another unorthodox solution may come from the place where most of the European liberals wouldn't like to hear about, and that is China. There is no church in China, there is no religion in China, not because of communism, but because there was no religion for 5,000 years. Taoism was philosophy, Confucianism was ethics, there was some Buddhism, but largely country have remained secular for most of its development through 5,000 years. And there is a different concept in China about everything. And it's not only because of communism, it's simply because there is a different concept. And they are technological, and they are developing a very interesting model of fusion of capitalism and communism, unprecedented in history. There is no such a case before. They don't know what's going on. They try to understand how this model works. It works so far. We try to understand how this model works. So I think, in the less orthodox fields, in the more unexpected places, we can find better solutions than in the usual suspects, that we target when we come to these issues. And the last word about Bill Joy again. He warned about one more thing, that we have to take, I think, seriously, and that is about scientific experiments and developments currently. And he said there are things in science at the moment that are so bad that they shouldn't be done at all. So having an American scientist to ask to ban certain scientific experiments is something that we have seriously to consider.
Yes, I would add that it was a very good point about Israel and the sort of asymmetry between very advanced technology that Israel possesses and the lack of technology on the side of adversaries. Absolutely. So, and I think that it's a unique situation. For a long time, the Western world, including Israel, which is part of the West, so enjoyed some sort of superiority over adversaries in terms of technological advancement. What happens when there is no asymmetry anymore? It's a very important question. If you allow me just to use 10-15 seconds to switch to science fiction. So I would remember the film by Ridley Scott, The Blade Runner. You remember the replicants and the way they try to examine them. So the replicants are impossible to separate and distinguish from human individuals. But there is one thing: they have no emotions, seemingly. Then we learn that they do. But I think that what is important in our world is psychological competence, our understanding of how human hatred, anguish works. It is very important. I would agree that we have to confront evil in all its incarnations, but we have to change the paradigm concerning how to understand people who are our adversaries. There was a theory in the United States that, of course, that was the old good, know thy enemy, so to say. The Cold War, and they knew that they have to commission or recruit as many Soviet and Russian historians, political scientists as possible, because they had to know the enemy. But that was about academic side and intellectual knowledge of Russia. But when it comes to our new adversaries who are indistinguishable from us in terms of expertise or sometimes even cultural competences and attachments, it is the psyche. It is our psychological competence. It's very important, because if we dismiss that part, we would suffer immensely.
Thank you. We have, máme tu otázku dvěma.
There is two questions here in front and one last at the rear, and I think then we will have to close because there will be another panel.
Journalist, and I have a very short question, because most of the refugees that are now coming to Europe are from Muslim countries. And reason tells us that not everybody who is coming from these countries is a terrorist, of course. But on the other side, you see the attacks in Paris, and people are frightened. And what is the enlightened answer to this problem, in your opinion? How should we cope with the refugees?
Thank you.
No, pokud jsme hovořili o hodnotách.
When we spoke about values of humanism and enlightenment in Europe today, one of the fundamental values is also respect to otherness and tolerance to a different person, another person. And it is for me natural that in such a situation, Europe must be open to refugees from war zones, because that is a part of our values. If we speak about the concept of tolerance, then tolerance includes also hospitality. So, of course, we must welcome the people in the best possible conditions. I mean, that's clear to me. But I would differentiate in Islamism two things. I would distinguish terrorism, so what we see to happen from time to time in Europe, that is this form of jihad, and this creeping dissolution of European civilization by moderate Muslims who are convinced that they have understood European rules or Western rules of game, and they truly believe in it. But I am afraid that it is not so. And I think so the long-term risk is in the requirements, demands of Muslim minorities in towns where they want to have, I don't know, separate rooms only for women, refusal to be taken blood during Ramadan if you are a patient. So there are many other things which the Muslim pupils refuse to take part in physical training, etc., etc. So these jihadists, from this point of view, are doing or making a strategic mistake, because if they want to have Islam in Europe, if that is their objective, because what they do
evokes refusal by moderate Muslims. So this terrorist scheme is contradictory and counterproductive because we see these peaceful Muslims who don't like it, who reject it, but the Muslims, these peaceful Muslims in Europe, want to get room in Europe, their specific room in the public sphere, and I think it's a risk, long-term risk. And so I would distinguish between these two things. So you have a terrorist attack, but you cannot prevent it by rejecting to accept Syrian refugees. They don't need them to do their terrorist attacks. And on the other hand, we are not rejecting or not, or we accept the demands where this secular world gets penetrated by schemes which are alien to us. The European identity is a word which is very often abused, of course, but the European civilization is based on two texts. I think there are not more, only two texts, which is a New Testament and the Declaration of Human Rights. And I think originally it was called the Declaration of the Rights of a Human Being and a Citizen. And I think it's a more accurate wording, because we speak about a human being and citizen where you have a line between the private and public sphere. And I think it's a very fundamental difference. And these two texts, from my point of view, current point of view, are the basic texts of our civilization. So I think that the principle of secularism is not by accident. It is not an accidental phenomenon in Christian culture. The Old Testament and Quran don't accept a division between secular and holy, secular and spiritual. The law of the book is the law of the state. That is the Old Testament and Quran. That is not in the New Testament. When Jesus tells us in New Testament what belongs to the emperor is emperors and what belongs to God is God's, there is this division, and it means it is a doctrine, it is a transcendence of his belief. But this part was really which allowed the Enlightenment and the real secularization. That is what helped us to divide these two entities without harming the dogma. But in Quran, this concept is anti-dogmatic. So unless Islam doesn't go through its enlightenment, we won't be free of a source of conflict in Europe. It will be not in the form we have seen yesterday, but I think there will be these everyday small contacts among people which will show it.
One brief comment. You will remember that there were more than 500,000 Bosnian Muslim refugees coming to European Union from Bosnia, and there was no major problem. I mean, there was a infrastructural problem, but there was no major problem. 300,000 only in Germany. They were welcome in Germany, in Sweden, in the Netherlands, in many European countries, and they integrated. They today live in these countries. Many of them got the state jobs. They became part of the society. It didn't happen the same with, for example, Polish immigrants in some of the Western countries. They are usually, as we heard yesterday, every second home in Berlin has a Polish maid. So they are doing low-key jobs. what will be very helpful if all these people who come start, obviously, their lives from the very difficult point, as any refugee starts from a very difficult point, but if their children would have the same chance as the children of the refugees, immigrants coming to the United States would have, that would help first to avoid that we have a twofold problem, that we have a problem of the other and the class problem which actually merge. So I think that at least we can tackle both problems by encouraging our societies to integrate these newcomers in the fair way, and to give them a chance to, at least in the second generation, become viable citizens of our countries.
Yes, I agree. Very briefly, I would add that, well, of course, things will not be easy, and I think that objectively there are some obstacles. For instance, there will be some cultural wars, I believe, what we call cultural wars, over some concepts or forms of sensibility. Equality of men and women is an unquestionable norm in Europe, and unquestionable. And this is something that is not very lightly taken for granted, to say the least, in Muslim countries. Or, for instance, gays and lesbians. We respect gay and lesbian people. We respect LGBT people, which is a problem elsewhere. We know it. So that's why I wouldn't be sugary sweet and schmaltzy here, saying that things will be rosy and beautiful. No. There will be some cultural wars. There will be difficult things. But still, my optimism comes from the fact, I'm finishing, that as a Lithuanian and Jewish at one and the same time, I know one simple thing, that if you are a Jew but are well integrated and is part of the culture and are part of the culture, it doesn't say anything about the real emotion that is nurtured vis-a-vis yourself. Meaning that I know that to be disliked is a lot of many Jews in Europe. But you have to live with this, and finally the next generation would be more successful.
And yes, the last comment for you, yes, everybody in this part of Europe believes that Germany should accept all the refugees. Next about you.
Hello, good evening. My name is Lucia Klapáčová and I'm from Slovakia, from here. I was a child when the communist regime fell, but after that, I still remember some things, and I was very much cherishing and being very happy with everything that was brought here after that, with the freedom and democracy, and mostly with European Union, which brought also tremendous change for this part of the Europe, absolutely. So myself, I tried to be part of that, and I was really celebrating those days, and it was amazing for us, and also even despite of criticism of the EU, I am still very much a fan of it. However, then two things happened to me. First was that I started to represent one of our political parties in Brussels, in one of the European political parties. And the second was that I started to spend my time in the Western Balkans a lot. In other parts of the world too, but there as well. And I started to see that, for example, in Brussels many times, the big European leaders showed us, or big European parties showed us, that the values which they cherish at home, they do not really cherish when it comes to the countries outside of the border of European Union. I saw it then, for example, the new members were becoming parts of these big European circles. The only thing that really mattered actually was the power. It meant if you won elections, you were good enough. They never looked really into what the values those people stand for. In the Western Balkans, I saw how we kept in the power the regimes connected to the mafia and war crimes and all these kind of things. And I saw how even the people who really wanted change to happen, who were part of the entire war regimes, not regimes, but the activities, they stopped losing their faith in what European Union and Europe as such can bring them. In Kosovo, in Macedonia, in Bosnia as well, of course. I spent a lot of time there speaking and talking with my friends who are secular Muslims.
Excuse me, please.
Sure. I came to the conclusion that what will cause the fall of Europe or EU is what we are doing outside of our borders. Now we face the migration crisis. I don't know, have you been looking at this from this perspective, and what can we do to change this? Thank you.
I think we have to understand, or to try to understand, who is supplying arms to the terrorists, who is supplying money, how is it connected with the corporate capitalism or is it not? Does the corporate capitalism erode our societies in a parallel way or connected with these things? I think that we have to start to deal with the causes and not only with the consequences, not only with the symptoms, but also with the real problems. I'm afraid that in the current obsession by the social media, that we have the illusion of being activist, being engaged by posting some comments on our social media, though many people actually, that's maybe the biggest disappointment that we have to face, and that is that now when everybody is able to publish to the world anything, 90 or even 95% of the people decided to publish, I eat a sausage with a cabbage now.
Well, I absolutely agree with you, and I do not wish to repeat your point, but only one thing that I could add to this comment is that, well, we have to develop some competences to be successful in the EU and to preserve the project. We have to be, well, there is some sort of asymmetry of competence and knowledge when it comes to non-EU world, so to say. If you try to talk to our French or German friends about some dark sides, of the Soviet Union or Russia, they are not as knowledgeable as we Balts are, of course. But when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America, we in the Baltics are not the wisest part of Europe, to say the least. So that's why there are some asymmetries, and it will be very important to use the best that Europe can offer, to fill the gaps using one another's experience and wisdom.
Tak to bola vlastne aj posledná otázka a posledné odpoveď.
This was the last question, or this is going to be the very last question and the last answers, because the next panel will probably start a little later. We had Leonidas Donskis here to my left. Haris Pašović. And Patrick Ovžedník. And I believe that our program will continue in some 7 to 10 minutes. Thank you. I wish you all a very good continuation of the